Hello everyone, my name is Gaurav Malhotra. I am a technical account manager with Google Cloud. Today I'm going to explain how developers can get increased productivity using Google Cloud Anthos platform, as Anthos enables build once, or rather write once and deploy anywhere paradigm. We all know that cloud is gaining momentum as we speak. In fact, a lot of organizations, all the major corporations have cloud in their roadmap as we speak. But at the same time, only a very few workloads have moved to the cloud. Rest all still remain on-premise for multiple reasons. Organizations are therefore thinking hybrid as a key methodology to take care of their workloads both on premise as well as on their data centers. What does this mean for the developers? This essentially means that if not proper help is provided to the developers, they would end up doing a lot of tools. They would end up duplicating their work. They would end up doing development on one system, maintaining the other systems, all in different disparate systems. But what the developers want to do is to write the code and deploy it. They want to work with very few tools so that their work can be done. They want to maintain existing applications as well as innovate as regards the business is concerned, without worrying about the infrastructure, without worrying about any other things that come in their way. But what has happened so far to ease developer productivity? So a few years ago, containers stormed the market, and containers helped immensely. Containers abstracted the operating system as well as the hardware layer and brought in developer ease of use, because now they would write code without worrying about what is there in the underlying operating system as well as in the hardware. All they would do is develop the code, and the code in the form of containers would then become portable. But soon, with a lot of containers coming into picture, there was obvious constraints behind containers, because there were challenges in scheduling, there were challenges in achieving good server utilization, there were challenges around networking and connectivity, as well as access control and logging. And soon it was felt that there was a need for a container orchestrator. Google launched an open source project called Kubernetes in the year 2014. And Google still contributes a lot on Kubernetes. Kubernetes is a portable, open source, container-centric management platform. In my mind, it does two things, and two things very well. One, once it is installed, it takes care of all the infrastructure, which essentially means it takes care of compute, hardware, as well compute, networking, and storage. And the second thing, it has a set of declarative APIs. Using declarative APIs and built-in primitives, it helps in deployment, rolling updates, scaling, monitoring, and a lot of other things, fairly heavy-duty application management tasks. So it definitely helped ease developer productivity. But as more and more microservices started coming up as a result of Kubernetes and its increased adoption, there was a need to manage, monitor, and secure the web services. And Kubernetes was unable to take care of that all by itself. As a result, Google, along with IBM and ride-sharing app Lyft, created an open source project called Istio. The basis of Istio was to create a platform for connecting, managing, and observing services, all based on Kubernetes. While it was based on Kubernetes, it was not really tied to Kubernetes as a platform. VM-based services were also able to tie into that mesh, and hence it provided a complete use case for developers. It helped in telemetry, routing, as well as security for web services. With Kubernetes in Istio, soon a lot of challenges regarding microservices, managing them, securing them, and in handling them were gone, but still developers were left with challenges around deployment. They would need to create containers for their code. They would need to export those containers onto a container registry. Then they would need to create or deploy a service, expose that service to the internet, set up logging, as well as scale the workloads. But again, as we stated earlier, all they wanted to do was to write code and deploy it, and nothing else. So to ease the deployment, Google and a host of other companies, including SAP, Pivotal, IBM, etc., created an open source project called Knative. The idea behind that project was to create building blocks for serverless workloads on Kubernetes. And when I say serverless, I mean serverless without the lock-in of a serverless. And the idea for Knative was to do three main things. One was build, that is turn your code into containers. The second one was to serve, take care of all the routing, auto scaling, splitting, etc. And the third one was eventing, to help conform to cloud event specification. With these three open source initiatives, developer productivity increased quite a bit. But what Anthos brought into the table using these three open source initiatives was further increase the developer productivity, because then Anthos included the support for on-premise workloads. So now organizations, developers can utilize these three open source softwares within their data centers. They don't need to really go to the cloud if they are not ready. And so Anthos, in my mind, would help them run a particular service for a job, whether it is on-prem or cloud, whether it is monolith or modern, whether it is new or existing. Really the best service for the job, without worrying about user fragmentation, without worrying about developer issues, as well as without worrying about where it is run. Anthos is a true open source stack. It is a pure software stack, which essentially means that unlike some of the other providers, it doesn't need any hardware along with it. It has Kubernetes for container orchestration. It has Istio to handle the service mesh and monitor, manage, and secure the services, as well as ensure consistent policies are running on the services. And it has Knative to have serverless primitives for Kubernetes, and that way users don't need to worry about the underlying hardware. Anthos is Google's platform for application monitoring or application modernization, which essentially means that you can run your applications whether on cloud or whether on-premise without any issues. So let's look at what are the key components of Anthos. So if we were to go from bottom down, and with Anthos, Google Cloud provided GKE on-prem. This is essentially the same GKE that was there on Google Cloud, but essentially this was delivered to on-prem data centers. What this meant was users were encouraged to do rebuilds instead of doing upgrades. They were doing programmatic provisions of infrastructure, and they were doing upgrades via controllers and not manually. With Anthos, we provided a multi-cluster, multi-cloud control plane. The control plane would help manage the whole Anthos configurations from a single pane of glass. And there were three components there: config management, hub, and service mesh. The hub is a centralized management piece which would help register the on-prem clusters as they come online and allows you to interact with your on-premise clusters. in a seamless manner. The config management propagates policy as a code thought process, essentially helps sync the policies across all the constituent clusters and so that the policies are unified across the cluster. The service mesh helps create the service and make sure there is a centralized service and mesh policy, ensure services are secure, they can be managed, there is a centralized policy, and they can be monitored. So what are the key differentiators of Anthos, or where Anthos stands apart? There are 5 key differentiators. Simplified management, as in not only with Anthos, not only your binaries are portable, because the same binary can run either on premise or on cloud, but at the same time your policies, your infrastructure scripts, your monitoring scripts, all are consistent. So users don't need to have multiple code bases to work on multiple sources. It has consistent controls. With unified policy management, Anthos helps you manage the policies just like seamlessly, without any trouble. A single policy can be applied to on-prem clusters as well as on the cloud clusters. Flexible deployment. As of today, Anthos helps deploy on any architecture certified by VMware, but and of course Google Cloud. Portable applications with a lot of open source built into Anthos, Kubernetes, Istio, as well as Knative. Anthos helps portable applications because wherever you build the application, you can take away the applications to the cloud or on premise without any issues. And Anthos provides a very vibrant marketplace which has tons of apps built on Kubernetes. This helps you extend the features of your solution, not by code, but by service, which is tremendously easier. So let's deep dive into some of the core components for Anthos. From a Kubernetes point of view, Anthos ships with 2 offerings, Anthos GKE and Anthos deployed on VMware. Anthos GKE is the same GKE on cloud, but has additional things like automation, multi-tenancy, security, and networking. Apart from that, one of the important things behind Anthos GKE is it is backed by a financially backed SLA, which essentially means that there is an SLA for uptime for Anthos. The Anthos deployed on VMware is the on-prem Anthos GKE cluster, which you can deploy on your on-prem data centers which have VMware architecture at this point in time. It has Anthos service mesh. So apart from monitoring, managing, and securing the services, it helps ensure consistent policies onto the services. And apart from that, it helps provides analytics and recommendations to these services. It has Cloud Run and Cloud Run for Anthos. Both of these are compatible with Knative. And while Cloud Run runs on Google Cloud, the Cloud Run for Anthos enables serverless in your on-prem clusters, wherever Anthos is running. It has config management, as I mentioned earlier, which encourages users to treat policy as code. So essentially, you write rules regarding a policy. If, for example, you would want the developers not to have access to production environment, you can write a rule, and once that rule gets propagated, it gets propagated to the entire cluster seamlessly without users doing the grunt work. And it enforces that policy across the cluster. Optionally, Anthos has Stackdriver. Stackdriver, as you may know, is a platform for logging, monitoring, tracking, and profiling applications. It is compatible with everything on Google Cloud. It is compatible with AWS EC2 as well as the on-prem resources. But more importantly, it has native support for Kubernetes on GCP and elsewhere, which is where it becomes really useful. As I mentioned earlier as well, Anthos ships with a very vibrant marketplace for Anthos. This is the place where you can have multiple apps provided by either Google or Google certified partners deployed on Kubernetes. And these apps would help extend the feature of your application multifold. The additional advantage behind Marketplace is obviously simplified operations, because it generates single bill for GCP and third-party services, as well as it has managed updates. So Anthos is hybrid done right. Essentially, it can run wherever you run, whether you want to run it on your on-prem data centers or on the cloud. It doesn't has any problems. It has a software back stack. It doesn't need any hardware. It is built on open source, which essentially means that users or developers or organizations are not tied to a particular cloud provider, which has been a big problem for organizations to adopt to cloud. And with Kubernetes, Istio, Knative, all of them open source, that problem goes away. It is ready for cloud. Anthos helps you build applications without worrying about what is underlying infrastructure. It is really the way cloud native applications should be built. And this is how Google built its own applications. So let's look at a very quick fire example as to how to modernize an app with Anthos. It is very easy to get started. There are just 5 steps. You can modernize any app. And essentially, what this would end up doing is modernizing your app and bringing to the cloud if you would like. So the step 1 is really, you can pick any of your virtualized application from your on-prem data center, and you can use migrate for Anthos and create and migrate that app into Anthos cluster, again deployed on your data center. You can manage these apps with service graphs, again something that gets automatically generated without the need for you to develop any code. And these service graphs help you understand the SLO of a service and whether the service is meeting a particular SLO or not. You can deploy brand new apps right next to the existing apps, because that is what you would always want to do. Essentially, make sure your apps coexist with new as well as existing. You can choose to have security and config policies for your existing as well as new projects. So essentially, taking the example that I quoted earlier, if you would like to ensure that developers do not get access to production system, you can create a rule stating that, and the config management, the Anthos config management would push that rule to both on-prem and the cloud at the same time. Lastly, it's an optional step. If you're ready, you can move that application to the cloud. And again, remember, you don't need to do anything to move that application to the cloud. Essentially, all you have to do is just deploy it differently. That's it. And it gets deployed onto the cloud without even changing a single line of code. As you will notice, Anthos has tools for every role. It has something for every persona of your organization. So for example, platform engineering team has a way to centralize, manage, and make sure that they are managing consistent structure with frequent updates. It has developer support in terms of IDEs and CI and CD integrations. Service operators can find something for themselves in Anthos by making sure that services are simple to deploy and roll back if something were to go wrong. They have a chance to observe the service and get analysis or analytics out of those services. And then security and compliance team can ensure that consistent policies are being pushed to the cluster, ensuring that the organization's assets are not at risk. So in a nutshell, to conclude a long story short, Anthos helps you modernize in place. You don't need to really go to the cloud to, to go to Anthos. You can modernize within your own data center and then choose to move to the cloud at your own pace. It helps you automate policies and security at scale, which essentially means that Anthos would help you automate the policy management and make sure consistent policies are being tracked. It helps you ensure consistency by using Kubernetes, by using GK, by using Knative, as well as by using Istio. It lets you manage your applications in an open source stack, build your applications once, and then choose to manage and deploy it anywhere that you choose to do so. So what are you waiting for? Why don't you go ahead and try Anthos at cloud.google.com/Anthos, and it has tons of material to help you get started on Anthos today. Thank you.